Welcome to the Microsoft 365 virtual marathon. My legal name is William, but I go by Andy, so feel free to call me Andy. I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about sharing in Office 365, how to share files and content effectively. I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Andy Huneycutt, so feel free to reach out to me on Twitter if you have any follow-up or if you have any questions from the session. As we get started, I want to give a big thank you to all of our conference organizers for putting this event together. I also want to say thank you to the formerly known as the SharePoint conference. They're the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference now for stepping in and helping out and turning this event into a worldwide event, a 36-hour marathon, over 400 sessions. This is really incredible. I'm really happy to be a part of this. I'm really looking forward to 2021, where hopefully things start to get back to normal just a little bit, so that maybe we can see one another face-to-face at the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference in Las Vegas. I've been to a few of these. It's an amazing conference. It's a great opportunity to network, to learn, and just to continue to grow professionally. So hopefully we will be back to in-person conferences by 2021. But big thanks to the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference for helping out. We couldn't do this without our sponsors. As mentioned, I run the Charlotte area SharePoint user group, so I'm typically on the other side of the camera. I do speak and present, but I also do a lot with organizing, and I work with many of these companies very closely. Without their sponsorship, these events aren't possible. So I just want to say thank you to all of our sponsors for helping us to put on this event. They help with the large events. They help with the regional events, they help with the online virtual events, they also help with the smaller events like the SharePoint Saturdays, the Office 365 Saturdays, and the SQL Saturdays. We can't do it without the help of our sponsors. So big thank you to all of the sponsors for helping to put on such an amazing event. Just a little charity fundraiser that they have going on. Consider donating to the following relief funds, whether it's the United Way or the International Medical Corps. There are a lot of people out there that could really use our help. So if you have anything, if you can contribute in any way, please do so, because times are a little tough right now for a lot of people, and every little bit can definitely help. It's really awesome that the organizers were able to put together some of the donations to these charitable organizations. So I'm really proud to be a part of a conference that does this. So who am I? What are we here to talk about? As mentioned, my name is Andy Huneycutt. I am from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm an enterprise collaboration specialist. I run my own company called Upskill Tech Incorporated, but I also work with C Prime training, C Prime Learning. They're a training organization formerly known as ASPE Training. I've been a professional educator, trainer, consultant, coach for about 10 years now. Started off with SharePoint 2007, and here I am in the cloud, Microsoft 365, SharePoint Online, Teams, Power Platform, and everything else there. As mentioned, I do run a Charlotte SharePoint Saturday of the country. So we're here to learn about sharing in Office 365, how to share files and content effectively so that your users can get to the things that they need, but to do so in a secure manner, but to be able to work from this platform. And I think this is increasingly important, especially today with the challenges that we have for working from home. As we're working remote, we're outside of the office, we're outside of the firewall, we're outside of that secure environment. Some of us are working without a VPN. So we want to make sure that we're able to continue to work, that we can get to the things that we need, but to do so in a manner that's going to save time, but also be safe and secure. So when we talk about this, we're talking about permissions in SharePoint. We're talking about Microsoft 365 groups. We're talking about Microsoft Teams. We're talking about OneDrive for Business. We're even talking about email and effectively sharing content. So we're going to talk about shareable links, how we can use the links and the tools that we have to work on that content, but give the right people access to that. So we're going to talk about how to share files and folders securely, the different types of shareable links that we have, apps that are going to use these links, some of the settings that you can use and some of the things that you can define around that, even a little bit on things like expiration, and then external access to tools like SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams. So with that, let's start very, very high level. SharePoint. Now, when we start off with sharing and content, there's a source, there's a content source. And for many of us, that is SharePoint. It's been SharePoint for a number of years. As we get into SharePoint Online, the traditional model that we've used for sharing content still applies. You have SharePoint groups, you have permission levels, and then you have permissions. We use groups to take a group of people that have a common role, a common need for access to information. We group them together. And then we give the group a permission level. That permission level could be full control, like an owner. It could be edit or contribute for somebody who needs to work with content. It could be read only. It could be restricted read for someone that might need to just consume content that's out there. But typically we use the group model to secure content and access to that content. Now, outside of that, that happens at the site level. So what outside of that actually happens at the admin level? Our admins can turn on tools or can turn on features that can allow us to share externally, or they could turn off external sharing. So you can't share from a SharePoint site and have that information go to somebody who doesn't work for the organization. Now, we have the admin controls, and then we have kind of the site owner controls. We're going to focus a little bit more on the site owner end user application for this particular presentation. But those groups are going to be a part of this conversation. The groups are what allow us to control that level of access and to control that information. Now, you can very quickly access this in SharePoint Online today. Go to your gear icon, look for site permissions. It's a link that's right over there. It's going to pop up the window that you actually see on the screen here. That's going to give you the default, the 3 default groups that every site has. When you provision a site in SharePoint, you get an owners group, you get a members group, and then you get a visitors group. The owners group, they have full control. They can add and remove other people. They can turn on or off features. They can add other objects like lists and libraries. Members are typically people that can contribute to content, add, update, edit, delete content that's already there. Occasionally, we elevate their permissions and we let them have full editor rights, meaning they can create lists and libraries in addition to managing content there. And then we have our visitors. These people are typically read-only. They can consume the content that's out there, but they can't modify it or delete it. They can't work with any lists or any libraries. They can just work with the content that's there. So those are the 3 default SharePoint groups that we actually have. But you have the ability to go into the advanced permissions and settings, and from there you can create additional groups for other purposes. You can assign members to those groups. You can create different permission levels there, and then you can work with the granular permissions. But what we're talking about here is access to the whole site. We're granting you access to maybe everything in the site that's inheriting permissions from the site. SharePoint uses an inherited permission model. Any object, a list or library in a site, by default pulls its permissions from the parent, unless we choose to make unique permissions. So if we choose to make unique permissions, we can pick and choose which groups have access to those uniquely permissioned objects, and then we can control access from there. But typically we're talking about the whole site or large numbers of objects in there. And the site owner is typically the one that controls this. Now, for anybody who's ever worked with SharePoint permissions, when you start working with SharePoint groups and inherited permissions and unique permissions, it can get pretty complex really quickly. And sometimes we just want to share a piece of content. We just want to share a file or a couple of files in a folder. We don't want to share the whole site. So we don't want to have to go and rebuild our whole permission model in order to do that. We also don't want to have a whole lot of unique permissions on content in order to do that. So even though it's really easy to get to site permissions, a lot of times we're just trying to share a couple of things, so we don't need to rebuild the whole model for the whole site. We want to try and keep it simple. So we're going to talk about some of the options that you have there. Now, just kind of moving forward, you have the option to share the whole site. That means everything that's in the site. And there are different ways to share the entire site. But if you actually visit the site, go to the gear icon or go to a link up in the top, you're going to have options to actually share. And that's the quickest way to add people to the SharePoint groups that you already have. And then turn anything in those in those sites, any lists, any libraries, any objects that inherit from the site, they're going to be able to use those same permissions. Now, if you're coming from SharePoint on-prem, like 2013, 2016, 2019, or even if you're using the classic user interface in SharePoint Online, this menu should look very familiar to you. Share. You see share, follow, sync, edit, and focus on content. It's anchored up in the top right-hand corner. When you click share, this little menu that you see here actually pops up. That allows you to share that site with someone. But what you're actually doing in this particular instance is you are entering in a name and you're looking up somebody who is maybe a member of your organization. They're in your Active Directory. They're part of the users and groups that are available for membership inside of your sites. You're adding them to a SharePoint group. So by using the share command, you're actually adding them into that SharePoint group. And in turn, anything inheriting from the site, you're adding them to that as well, access and then control once you do that. Now you're gonna have options from the dropdown. You're gonna be able to pick and choose the group that you want to add them to. You can choose to send them an email message. You don't have to, but you can send them an email and then you'll get a confirmation that the site was shared. If you're in SharePoint Online or 2019 and you're using the new modern user interface, they streamlined that menu a good bit. Again, it's in the top right-hand corner, but you'll see following, shared, and then like next steps that actually pops up there. So when you click share there, you get the same menu that you saw in the classic or the on-premises versions of SharePoint, and then you get the same options. You can add and remove people from groups, or you can add people rather to groups. You can choose to send them an email, and you can even customize a message and you can send it. But again, you're sharing the entire site. You're sharing everything in the site and anything that's inheriting its permissions from that site. Now, that share button allows me to share, but what it doesn't allow me to do is to manage membership and remove people and control the membership if I need to. So it's very much for adding people, not so much for managing or removing people. That's where we would actually go into site settings, users and groups and permissions, and we'd manage it from the access from there. Now, I'm going to focus in a good bit on SharePoint Online because many of our users are actually migrating into the cloud. They're moving into SharePoint Online from SharePoint On-Prem. Microsoft has extended support for like SharePoint 2010 for a little while, especially due to the COVID-19. But end of life for like SharePoint 2010 is fastly approaching for a lot of organizations. A lot of 2013 tenants are starting to move into SharePoint Online. And over the last couple of years in my consulting and my training world, more and more of my clients are moving to the cloud. It's to the point now where it's more cloud than it actually is on-prem. So I'm going to focus in on a lot of cloud-based sharing as we move forward. So in SharePoint Online, when I go into the gear icon and I select permissions and sharing, I have this screen that as a site owner, I can access right away. It's called the site sharing settings. This gives me control over how the site can actually be shared. So there are three primary options that we can work with right away, sharing permissions. Site owners and members can share files, folders in the site. So if you're in the owners group or if you're in the members group, you can share the site with other people. You can give them access to files and folders inside the people using the share command. We could limit that though by going to site owners and members. People with the edit permissions would be able to share files and folders, but only the site owner can share the site. So that means the owner of the site controls access to the site, but if you're a member of the site, you would be able to maybe share some content inside of the site. But I can even elevate that if I need to. I can set it so that only the site owner can share the site. Only the site owner can share files and folders and content within the site. So I get those three levels of control right away. But the default is that the owners and members can share the files in the site, the folders in the site, and the site overall. Now that's outside of any administration being done. This is all done at the site level. Additionally, we have this thing called access request. So we can control whether people can solicit to actually gain access to the site. So maybe we're a private site, they found us in a search or they found us in a directory and they want to join the site. We can set up the access request, whether the owners of the site can handle that, whether people with specific email addresses can handle it, and then we can give a custom message. That gives us kind of a gateway to review pending requests, and then we can add people to the site if we need to. So I set this up first from the gear icon. Now, next up, working with the actual permissions. One thing that you have to do in SharePoint Online, or one thing that you have to consider, is Office 365 groups, or Microsoft 365 groups, as they've recently been renamed. A Microsoft 365 group takes a SharePoint site and actually extends its capabilities to other applications. So if I'm in a SharePoint site and I am connected to a Microsoft 365 group, there's also a OneNote notebook that the team is sharing. There's a planner plan that the team is sharing. There might be a stream video channel group that we're working with. There might be a shared mailbox or calendar, or we might be connected to Yammer or even Microsoft Teams. What that allows us to do is to have owners and members at the SharePoint site level grant access to the site, but then they can also access those other applications in Office 365 for collaborative purposes. Those are going to be people that are producing content. Those are going to be people that are drafting content. Now, that sits on top of the classic permission model. So the classic permission model is actually still there. So the SharePoint groups, permissions, and permission levels are still there. You can grant access to just the SharePoint site without granting access to the rest of the Microsoft 365 group objects that are actually out there. So if you're working with those Microsoft 365 groups, it's another level of permissions and sharing that you need to consider. Who are going to be the producers of content, who are going to be the consumers of content, and that kind of tells you whether they fall into the SharePoint group model or the Microsoft 365 group model. Now, if you want to know in your site if it's group connected, that's actually really easy. Hover over the name of the site. If a little card pops up, that's a Microsoft 365 group enabled site. But also you can go to the left hand or the right hand side of your site and you'll see like share, following, and you might even see members over there. If you see members, that's another indication that that site is actually a Microsoft 365 group enabled site. So when you start working with those type of sites, you can actually go into your setting permissions. You can invite people in, and then you can add them to those group connected sites. But by adding them to the group site or the group connected site, you're actually adding them to the SharePoint site and the other objects like Planner, like OneNote, like Stream, like the shared mailbox and calendar and Outlook. So you're extending their membership beyond just the SharePoint site. So that's a consideration that you have to make as well. So that grants access to the site at a global level, and then anything that inherits permissions, that access is going to apply as well. And then you can create unique permissions as you need to. But if you start working with things like your unique permissions, what you're going to run into is a very complex scenario for managing access to content. And sometimes that's more work than a group wants to put in, more work than an organization wants to work with. And untangling unique permissions and nested permissions is really challenging. It's really complex. So in 2013, Microsoft introduced the way or a way to share files and folders. And this is a share command that's specific on files and folders where you're granting access to something in the site, but not the rest of the site. It was actually born from OneDrive for Business, and then it started to roll out into SharePoint 2013, and now it's something that we use very heavily in SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, and even to a certain extent Microsoft Teams moving forward. So when we start sharing individual files and folders, we're sharing outside of that group membership, whether it's SharePoint groups or Microsoft 365 groups. You're sharing in the context of a single file or a group of files inside of a folder. We're not having to rebuild the permission model. We're not setting unique permissions on content. We're granting limited access to content that we can view, we can get reports on, and we can even change after the fact if we need to. So the files that we typically store on the site are available to everybody that's part of a group that has access to the site, but occasionally somebody from outside the group needs access to content. It's not worth it to rebuild the permission model, so sharing gives us a quick way to grant access to just that content. We can see who the content is being shared with at any time. We can stop sharing at any time if we need to. We can even get some reporting around that. So when you start looking at this, this is what it looked like previously. So in the classic user interface, or if you're in SharePoint on-prem, this is what you see. You go to your menu next to the name of the object, in this case, a document in a library, and then you see the share button show up. That share allows you to pop up a window that you can invite people to edit or view that content, and then you can type in a personal message, and you can even send an email invitation. You are not adding them to a SharePoint group or a Microsoft 365 group. You're not granting them access to the rest of the library. You're not granting them access to the site. You're granting them access to that file, and it's either read-only or they can edit the file. That's what it looked like in the classic user interface. This is what it looks like in the modern user interface. We have the share command that shows up in the command bar, but it also shows up in line with the item. So you select the share command here. It's essentially the same thing. It's either going to be read only or edit, but you can then enter in the name or email addresses of the people that you want to share with, provide a message, and you can send right from here. It'll generate a message for you in Outlook, and it'll actually send that to the recipient. You can even customize the message in Outlook if you want, or you can just copy the link and you can distribute the link however you choose to do so. But what you're doing here is limited access to just that file, read only, or with the ability to edit. But there's some nuance to this. There's multiple degrees of sharing. There's multiple sharing applications, and this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing for end users who have the ability to share. So that's what we want to really spotlight on here. So when you grant access through that share command, that's limited access to that specific item or to that folder and the content that's inside of it. This will work the same way whether you're in SharePoint or whether you're in OneDrive. Now, there are four primary options: anyone, people in your organization, people with existing access, or specific people. And we're going to break this down in depth in just a couple of slides, because the high-level overview here doesn't quite give you the whole story. Anyone literally means anyone, whether they're internal or external to the organization. People in your organization means only people in the organization can access that file, but they could forward it to someone else. People with existing access means it's somebody who already has access to the document. You're just kind of nudging them to get back to that file. And specific people means only the people that I define can use this link. They can't forward it or pass it on. Now, what you'll actually see in the user interface looks like this. So I go in, I choose the share option, I choose my or enter in names, enter in the message, but I'm going to click on the link that says people in organization with this link can edit. And that's going to take me to the link settings. In the link settings, I'm going to be able to pick and choose the level of sharing that I want to give them, whether it's anyone, people in the organization, people with specific access, or specific people. And depending on which of those four options that I select as to what's going to show up at the menu down at the bottom. They might be able to edit, allow editing. The file might be read only. I might be able to block the download. So the first one that we see on the right-hand side here, allow editing, that means they can edit that file. Now, this one kind of scares people, so let me go ahead and put that to rest. Allow editing. Yes, they can edit the file. But SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business both support versioning. It's on by default. You cannot turn it off. So if they edit the file and you don't like it, you can roll back to a previous version of the document and recover it or restore it. So version history is turned on in SharePoint for 500 major versions of every single file that you upload. In OneDrive, it's 100 major versions of every single file that you upload. So that should put you at ease. If I allow you to edit the file and I don't like what you did, I can roll it back to a previous version. Now, the second one you see here is when you uncheck allow editing. That's read only. That means you can read the file, but you can't make any edits to it. Now, you can read it, you can download it, you could print out a copy of it, you could even make a copy of it and edit that to your heart's content. But if I need to, I can make that read only and I can block the download, which means you can't download the file. You can only read it in the web browser, and you can't print out the copy and take it with you. So I'm going to pick and choose the Wink settings level of sharing, and then I'm going to choose the additional settings that I want. These are not the only settings that you're going to see. We'll come back to this in just a bit. So I'm going to apply, then I'm going to go enter my names, and I'm going to send from there. But what does anyone or people in the organization or specific access, specific people, what does that actually mean? So Microsoft had some really good slides on this at a conference recently. So let's break this down just a little bit more in depth. What do each one of those actually mean? And we're also going to tie this into the administrative settings. What can they turn on or off? For instance, notice in these 3 screenshots, anyone with the link is disabled. So what do those actually mean? First up, anyone with the link. Anyone with the link is exactly what it sounds like, anyone with the link. That link is transferable, meaning anybody that gets that link can use that link, whether they're internal or external to the company. So let's say I work for Contoso. I could pass this over to Mark. Mark could pass this over to Naomi, and then Naomi could decide, you know what, I need this person over here that works at this other company to have access to it, and she could send it over to Trevor, and then Trevor could send it over to Tasha. They are external to our company. So that link is actually a transferable link. Anybody that gets it can use it and access it to get to that file, but they need that link in order to actually access that file. So for obvious reasons, a lot of companies turn this off. They don't want a transferable link that anybody could use, whether it's internal or external, because it might start off as something internal and then it leaks external, and then we've got a data breach or a data leak based off of that file or that content. So the next one that we see is anyone or people in your organization. So this one is a transferable link, but it's only transferable to people that work in my organization, meaning they're part of the same Office 365 tenant that I'm a part of. So I could pass this link to Mark. Mark could pass it to Naomi. Naomi could pass it to Bill. But if they tried to pass it out external to like Trevor or Tasha, who don't work for the organization, that link's not going to work for the external entities. But anybody internally can freely pass that particular link around. Now that's the default for a lot of organizations. You can pass it around internally, but not a lot of organizations like that. They don't like links being freely passed around internally. Even though it's secure internally, they still don't want everybody to be able to just pass that link and freely get to content. For example, what if a CEO is working with some budgeting files and he shares the folder with those budgeting files with a colleague, and then that colleague accidentally shares it with somebody who shouldn't see those budgeting files, and then they pass it on. Now everybody in the organization could potentially have access to that folder. We'd have to go and delete the link and kind of start over. Next up, specific people. This means only the people that I define. Now this one is non-transferable, so I could send it to Mark, I could send it to Naomi, and they couldn't share it with anyone else. I could also send it externally to like Trevor and to Tasha, and they would be able to use it, but they couldn't pass it on to anybody else as well. It's specific to the person that I sent it to via the email address. So in the case of the people internal, if you try to use the link, it's going to check who you're logged in as, your presence, and then it's going to use that. And if it's external, it might verify with a follow-up email to the same email address that you are who you say you are, trying to actually use that link. So in both cases here, there is going to be some authentication mechanism that happens. If you're internal and it's specific, you have to be logged in as to who I sent it to. If it's external, there'll be a follow-up notification, and then you have to confirm via the follow-up notification that you are who you say you are while trying to actually use that link. And then the other option that we have, and I don't have a screenshot like this for it, is people with existing access. That means you already have access to that via a link, or maybe you're part of a group or a Microsoft 365 group that already has access to that particular content. I'm just sending you a link back to something that you already can access, so you're already authenticated to it, to that content. So when you start working with these links, you'll see share, but you'll also see copy link. as well. They both use the same objects or the same levels. Anyone, people in the org, specific people, or people with existing access. Both types of sharing are gonna use those same core fundamentals. The difference between share and copy link is that share drafts a nice little email for you. Copy link means you have to copy the link and manually distribute that however you want, whether you paste it in a Microsoft Teams chat window or whether you paste it in an email or some other tool. Copy link means you're going to have to do some of the work. And even when you choose to share, there's a copy link option that shows up underneath there. So with that, let's just move forward. Sharing happens in a number of different places in SharePoint Online, as well as Office 365. You can share right from your document library. You can open up the file in either Office Online, or you can open up the file in the Office application, and you would actually be able to share from there. So now we're up to like 3 different locations. Additionally, if you're using the OneDrive for Business Sync client, you're going to be able to share from your Files Explorer or from Finder on a Mac. So again, OneDrive for Business Sync client, that allows you to synchronize the contents of OneDrive or SharePoint to a local folder. That local folder syncs whenever you have internet connection. So you can keep kind of an offline or local copy of that content. Any changes you make in the cloud sync down to that folder. Any changes you make in the folder sync back up to the cloud. Well, with that enabled, you can actually share right from either Explorer or Finder. Right click on the item, share pops up, and then you get the same window, you get the same message. And that is one thing I'm going to bounce back one slide for. Notice the window right over here. This is a screenshot from a Mac. So it actually shows that same window. This is Files Explorer on Windows, same window. So the team did a really good job. The Microsoft team did a really good job of having a consistent user interface across all the different sharing systems, even different operating systems. All right, so you can share from Files Explorer or from Finder if you're using the OneDrive for Business Sync client. You would also be able to share from like the Office 365 homepage. Or so if you log into office.com, that's kind of the homepage of the start of your Office 365 experience. You'll see things that like recent, pinned, and shared with me. You can actually share right from there as well. And there's a couple other places you can share from in addition to that. The Search Center, you can actually view a file and you can share right from the Search Center. There's even a couple options in Teams to be able to directly share from there. So the menu is going to pop up in a number of different places. So choose who you want to share with, the level of sharing, enter in your names, your messages, and then hit file. Then we can go back and manage access. The sharing that we're doing though is a limited access to just that file. So if you ever go into your site settings and you view your users and groups, specifically permissions, you're going to see a menu that says there are some items in this site that have limited access. And limited access means it's a shareable link to that particular file. You can actually click on show these items and it'll give you a full list in the permissions area of everything that's actually been shared. In addition, you can go to site contents, and in site contents view site usage, and there's a list, a report you can run inside of site usage that actually shows you everything that's been shared externally. So there's a couple of different ways that you can view that. But on a file by file or folder by folder basis, you can actually highlight the item. You can go to the details pane, which is the eye icon, and you can manage access. And that'll show you for that particular file any links to that file and then any direct access to that file. So links are actually going to be done through the share command. So that's using the little share dialog and then sharing. You might see multiple links there. There's even an option to share from there. So you can grab another link from there if you need it. Below that though, you'll see direct access. And direct access is the people in groups that have been given direct access to that content. So that's through the SharePoint groups and permission levels and permissions, or through the Microsoft 365 group model and the permissions there. Now, this menu, if you look at the bottom, there's an advanced option. You can go to the advanced settings. That's like going to site settings and then going to users and permissions and viewing the permissions there. You can go into that advanced menu right from here for this particular item. But if you're looking for the sharing links, they're actually going to show up right over here. So this is the advanced menu. Shows your primary SharePoint groups or your domain groups or your direct access. And these SharePoint groups might have Office 365 or Microsoft 365 groups nested inside of them. This is the menu that I was talking about. There are limited access users on this site. Users have limited access of an item or a document under the site that's been shared with them. You can show users from here. You can even view whether the document's pulling its permissions from the parent or not. So you can manage everything related to the permissions from here. Showing the users, though, is going to give me a listing of everybody that has direct access to something in this particular object, in this case, a document library. And again, you just grab that by going, in this case, from Manage Access to Advanced down at the bottom. All right, so moving forward, that's what happens from the SharePoint side of things. I just want to compare that a little bit with the OneDrive side, so we can do a little compare and contrast there. So I'm in OneDrive for Business. I have a file. I click Share, and I'm going to see a similar menu to what we see inside of SharePoint. I can choose the link in the link settings. I can send it to a person, people, or a list of people. I can provide a custom message to go along with that. I can send an email. I can format an email, or I can choose to just copy the link and distribute that however I want. Now, if you look at the menus inside of there, so when you open up the link settings, you've got anyone with the link, you've got people in the organization, you've got existing access, you've got specific people. Depending on the link type that you've selected, you have additional settings that are going to show up there, like allow editing or block the download. But you'll also see, like in OneDrive specifically, expiration dates and even passwords. So we can password protect content that's being shared. We can set an expiration date on that link, meaning if the link isn't used for 30 days or if the link's 30 days old, it no longer actually works. So that's yet another wrinkle to our sharing experience, is being able to set like a password or an expiration date on that. So with that, I do want to provide a little bit of insight into the administration that kind of goes in into this, so that you understand exactly what the admins can do and then how they can work with some of that. So let me go into the administration menu. So this is the modern SharePoint Admin Center, and I'm in SharePoint Online for this. You have to have either SharePoint admin rights or like global admin rights in order to access this. So mainly our administrators are going to be in control here. You're going to go to policies and you're going to look for sharing inside of there. And your first thing you're actually going to see as part of that is going to be external sharing. So external sharing is going to be for both SharePoint and OneDrive. They're very much tied into one another in Office 365. So you'll notice at the top there's the most permissive, and then down below that there's least permissive. So it's anyone, new and existing guests. Existing guests are only people in your organization. So that's where we can start defining these particular settings. Now those are sliders, and they're actually tied to one another. It's possible to like lower the permissions on SharePoint without affecting OneDrive. So like SharePoint, we might say, well, let's lower it and new and existing guests can access anything, but in OneDrive, anyone can still work with information. But if I change the OneDrive settings, if I make the OneDrive settings more permissive or least permissive, then that's going to pull SharePoint down along with it. So SharePoint can fluctuate independently. OneDrive is going to pull SharePoint down along with it. Now, there are some external sharing settings that actually go into that as well that we would be able to define. We can also choose our file and folder links inside of here. So we have options to choose the type of link that's selected by default when sharing files and folders, anyone with the link, only people in the organization, or specific people. So this is where we can choose what is highlighted automatically from those previous menus. So if we turn off external sharing, doesn't make any sense to default to anyone with the link. So maybe switch it up. Some organizations don't like only people in the organization having access. They actually want to change that. So specific people is a default or a newer selection that you see there. And then from the link settings, when you choose the level of settings, should they be able to edit by default or have that box already checked, or should it be view only? We can actually change that here if we need to. The default is edit, so they can edit the file, but we could make it read only. If I'm an admin, I can choose the expiration and the permissions. So if I want the links to expire, I can make the links to expire. 30 days is the default, but you can change that, 60 days, 90 days. And then these links give these permissions, and then you see like view, edit, and upload for folders. So we can choose permission associated with that. And then there's some additional settings that you'll see that actually show up there. Show the owners, the names of the people who viewed their files in OneDrive. So if you visit OneDrive, along the left-hand side, you're going to see shared with me and shared by me. If you view shared with me, those are things that have been shared with me. That's what this is applying to. Let the site owners display the names of the people on pages. So any web part that displays that, you can view the names, and then use short links for sharing files and folders. The links are actually really long, and there's a couple of characters that determine or identify what type of link it is, but some of these links can be really long. So using the shorter links is a little bit cleaner if you can do that. So this is from the SharePoint Admin Center. Now let's switch gears. This is the OneDrive Admin Center. Again, very, very similar because they're very closely connected. So inside of here, I see sharing, I see links, so I can change the default link type. Shareable, anybody with the link, internal, only people in the organization, and then direct means to specific people. There's some advanced settings inside of there, like an expiration for a password. External sharing. So this is external sharing, and again, you see the sliders, SharePoint and OneDrive inside of here. Anyone, new and existing users, existing external users, and then only people in the org. You can fluctuate SharePoint independently of OneDrive, but OneDrive's tied to a SharePoint in there. And then there's some advanced external sharing that applies there. So that happens at the admin level, and again, only certain people are going to have access to that. Now, I'm going to pump the brakes for just a second. There are about 5 other locations where external sharing settings can actually be defined in Office 365. There's some in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange, and a couple other places. My colleague, he's a speaker here this week, Daniel Glenn, has a really good blog post on that. I'll try to put that in the Q&A window at the conclusion of it. But there's about 5 or 6 different locations where external sharing settings actually take place, and you have to synchronize those settings, otherwise limiting or controlling external sharing outside of what you see here, you're going to have some limited options. So a couple of best practices. When you go to share something with someone, use the most restrictive or secure link that you can. For instance, I personally do not like anyone in the org or anyone. I don't like transferable links. I don't want you sharing my content with other people outside of my control. So I typically do specific people if I'm doing a sharing link. And in addition to that, if I'm sharing a file with you, most of the time I'm okay with you editing the file because I'm secure with the version history that SharePoint supports. With the recycle bin, I can recover content. With the version history, I can roll back a file if I need to. So I have that control with that. So I limit it to specific people, but I usually allow you to edit the file. If I'm the IT admin, if I'm the IT pro, company policy is going to dictate how long links can last. So we might actually turn on links expire after 30 days, but that's outside of what the user can do. Stay away from anonymous links. A lot of the companies that I work with, we turn off anyone. We don't allow anyone as a transferable link. We go ahead and eliminate that. Anonymous links are convenient, but we really want to know who has access to that stuff. Share and copy versus email attaching. This is the hardest hurdle for users to get over. I work with a lot of end users, people that are, this is a small part of their job, just working with these systems. This is my whole job, so I'm invested in it. But a lot of the people that I work with, Office 365 is a very small part of what they do. So getting people to understand the difference between an email attachment and using a share and copy link is going to be a critical user adoption issue that you have. So just briefly, when you share an email attachment, you have a copy on your local computer, you attach it to that email, and then you send it. Well, right away, there's two copies of that file. There's your local, and then there's the Outlook version of it. Then that person on the other end gets it. So now they have that file. So now we're up to 3 copies. So they save a copy locally. They do their thing. They send it back to you. So now we're up to 5. And when you receive it, now we're up to 6 copies of that one file. We call this file forking. File forking is multiple instances of the same file, but we might have to stitch and merge the content in order to get the whole picture. It's an inefficient way to work. Plus, when you're working with email attachments, now the file's buried in your email, and you might select the wrong message with the file linked in it, and you might be working on an older version, and they're working on a new version. So which versions are the truth? So between file forking and disparate versions in there, it's really, really inefficient. So it's really easy in Office 365 to share and copy a link. I can click share, enter in your name, enter in a message, and there you go. Now you've got the link to the file. I can copy the link and send that to you in Teams, in a chat, or in a post or conversation. Now you've got a link to the file to work with. And we're all working from the same version, and there's no file forking associated with it. So it's a lot smarter way to work, but it's a culture change for a lot of people. So most end users aren't adjusted to that. So that's something to keep in mind. Outlook Online does something really cool. When you upload a file in Outlook Online, it asks you if you want to drop that in like your OneDrive and make it shareable, and it converts it to a shareable link. That is really awesome. They're doing the work for me. I love it, but the file's in OneDrive and not SharePoint. So just something to note. And I mentioned this numerous times, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to mention this one more time, version history. That gives me a little bit of comfort when I share something with someone, because I know version history can track the changes, and I can roll back and restore to that previous version if I actually need to. A lot of people that I've worked with over the last 10 years, they're reluctant to give up control of that file. It's their precious. They view it like the one ring, and they don't want anybody else to have it. I don't care. I'm going to control through shareable links who has access to my content. And if you do something I don't like, I can restore to a previous version. And if you corrupt the file, I can still recover that using restore this library, or restore my OneDrive, or even the recycle bin. So I have a lot of options that can definitely help me with that. So we got a couple minutes here at the end. I'm going to open things up for Q&A. So I do want to say thank you so much, everybody, for sitting in this. I hope you found it helpful. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well. William Huneycutt on LinkedIn, Twitter at Andy Huneycutt, HUNEYCUTT. With that, I hope you liked the session. Provide some feedback, and if you didn't, let me know I can do better the next time. And then event feedback. This is an awesome event. I hope you think the same thing. Let us know what they can do, or what the organizers know what they can do better the next time around. But thanks for having me, and check out the raffle. Try to win one of these Oculus Quests that they're actually giving away. I know there's a couple of questions in the chat window, so I'm going to go ahead and answer those. But folks, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Microsoft 365 virtual marathon. Appreciate you being here, and I'll go into Q&A. Right, I see 2 questions. I'll just answer these verbally and then try to provide a response. Can the default option to generate a share link be changed to people with current access? No, that's not one of the options that's actually provided. It's anyone, it's people in the organization, or specific people. Those are the 3 defaults that you get. And it looks like somebody else answered that. Any other questions?
I think there's one. My current default option is anyone with the link can access.
Yeah, that's the anyone option. So that's the admin setting is set to anyone by the default. I think that might have been a follow-up to the other question though. But I'll take another couple of minutes if you have any other questions.
Oh yes, I think you're right. That was a follow-up note from the previous question. I think, but I think there's a great learning around how Microsoft have changed their, strategy around the sharing the links to the end users. You have an employee targeting link. You have SharePoint site targeted links that you can share, and I think you will have to really watch yourself out when you are sharing. I think there are lots and lots of strategies being made, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a little complex because 5 or 6 different places where external sharing can be turned on or off, and then 2 separate locations, SharePoint and OneDrive, and even Microsoft Teams to a certain extent, where admin settings can be applied. And then there's the end user application of it. So there's 3 separate layers that really go into it, and hopefully, what we went over today really helps people to kind of understand where those 3 layers, and then to kind of devise their governance strategy from there.
Yeah.
All right, so it looks like a couple more popped up. I'll go ahead and answer those. Is permission inheritance and avoidance of item level permissions still the best practice for managing permissions? I would say yes. Using sharing as opposed to unique permissions is a little bit easier to manage because the shareable links can be found in a couple of menus and a couple of reports. A lot easier than going in and trying to build a report around items that are uniquely permissioned. Additionally, when you uniquely permission an item, you're breaking inheritance from the parent. You might inadvertently remove somebody that needed access to that file, and then remembering where you have unique permissions and controlling that is hard. It grows exponentially. So yes, and permission inheritance and avoidance of unique level item level permissions is definitely still a best practice, at least in my experience. Thank you. Didn't know about the coupled OneDrive and SharePoint permissions. Glad I could provide some insight on that. So appreciate the compliment there. And then how can the generated share link be changed from people within the org to people with existing access? Again, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull up a screenshot to kind of show you this. So going back to the admin center. So you see it's files and folder links listed here. Choose the type that's the default. So the default is anyone with the link. That's what you have. The only other 2 options they have are only people in your org. So that means people in organization, and they can pass it around. It's transferable. So that's the second one down on that list, which I'm going to, again, go back to another screenshot. So anyone is the default. People within the org, they can pass that around. And then the other one that you see listed there, specific people. So you can say specific people, and then you can, from that drop-down menu, you can specify who you want. The one you cannot set as a default, at least I don't know how, unless there's a PowerShell command for it, is people with existing access. You can't make that the default to my knowledge. It's not an option in the modern admin center, and if it's a PowerShell script, I don't know it. So hope that that helps. Again, I'll take another minute or 2 if you have any other questions. All right, folks, thank you so much.